Judge Richard Coleman slams his gavel, sentencing 17-year-old Marcus Jackson to life in prison without parole for a crime he didn't commit. Marcus stands shocked as the courtroom erupts. Judge smirks, leans in to whisper, "That's how we handle your kind in my courtroom." Judge makes call immediately after. It's done. The Jackson boy won't be a problem anymore. Unbeknownst to him, the call is picked up by court reporter's microphone. Judge Coleman had no idea who was listening on the other end of that recording, or that he'd just sentenced his own career to death. Could a father's power overcome a corrupt system determined to destroy his son? Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in fighting for justice in our broken system, hit that like and subscribe button, because tomorrow's special episode reveals how this corrupt judge's empire finally crumbled. Marcus Jackson stood frozen in the courtroom, his hands trembling as the weight of Judge Coleman's words crashed over him. Life in prison without parole. The 17-year-old honor student couldn't process how his life had just ended before it truly began. His mother's wails pierced the courtroom as bailiffs restrained her from rushing to her son. Marcus stared straight ahead, his mind rewinding to 6 months earlier, when police officers had stormed his high school locker, discovering a package of drugs he'd never seen before. The evidence had been entirely circumstantial. The prosecution had no fingerprints, no witnesses who saw Marcus with drugs, nothing but the mysterious package found in his unlocked locker. Yet prosecutor William Hargrove had spent the entire trial painting Marcus as a thug and menace to society, despite his 4.0 GPA and full scholarship offers to 3 universities. Marcus recalled how Hargrove consistently referred to his predominantly white neighborhood as where he was selling poison rather than where he lived. Marcus's court-appointed attorney, Gerald Wilson, had barely prepared for the case. Marcus remembered their 3 brief meetings before trial, how Wilson had repeatedly confused details of his case with others, and how he'd fallen asleep twice during crucial testimony. His objections were rare and ineffective, his cross-examinations brief and disorganized. When Marcus pointed out inconsistencies in police testimony, Wilson had brushed him off, saying, "Don't worry about the details, son." The trial had been riddled with racial microaggressions from start to finish. Judge Coleman had consistently referred to Marcus by his last name while addressing white defendants as "sir" or by their first names. When Marcus's teachers testified about his academic achievements and character, Judge Coleman had cut them short, calling their testimony irrelevant. Meanwhile, he allowed the prosecution to introduce rumors and hearsay about gang connections, despite Wilson's weak objections. The all-white jury had deliberated for only 30 minutes before returning with a guilty verdict. Marcus had watched, their faces throughout the trial, noting how several nodded along with the prosecutor's characterization of him as a wolf in sheep's clothing, a predator hiding behind good grades. Now as he stood for sentencing, Marcus saw not a hint of doubt or remorse in their expressions. As the bailiffs approached to lead him away, Marcus caught a final glimpse of his mother collapsing into the arms of his aunt. His basketball coach had his head in his hands. His English teacher, who had written his college recommendation letters, wiped tears from her eyes. All their faith in him, all their support, had meant nothing against a system determined to see him as nothing but a criminal. Inside, Marcus's thoughts raced through the future that had just been stolen from him. The college acceptance letters, sitting on his desk at home, the NASA internship he'd earned for the summer, his dream of becoming an aerospace engineer, inspired by the black astronauts who had broken barriers before him. All of it vanished with the bang of Judge Coleman's gavel. Court reporter Andrea Wilson sat at her stenography machine, mechanically recording the proceedings while fighting back her own disgust. She'd worked in Judge Coleman's courtroom for 3 years and had noticed patterns in his sentencing, but never had she seen such blatant disregard for justice. As the courtroom cleared, she remained at her station, watching Judge Coleman shuffle papers on his bench with smug satisfaction. When he believed everyone had left, Coleman picked up his phone and made the call that would change everything. "It's done. The Jackson boy won't be a problem anymore, Andrea's fingers froze over her machine as she realized it was still recording. The judge continued, his voice low but clear enough for the sensitive microphone to pick up. "Yeah, the usual story. Drug dealer off the streets, no appeals will work with what we've set up. I made sure of it." Andrea carefully saved the recording and powered down her equipment, her heart racing. Judge Coleman had no idea his words had been captured, preserved as evidence of his corruption. That night, Andrea sat in her apartment reviewing the courtroom, recordings, discovering not just the incriminating phone call, but numerous instances of the judge making racist remarks during sidebars and breaks. She debated what to do with this explosive information. Reporting it locally would likely lead nowhere, given Coleman's connections throughout the county justice system. As she researched Marcus's background, looking for anyone who might help, she discovered an article mentioning his estranged father. The piece included a photo that made Andrea gasp. Marcus's father was Anthony Jackson, the current U.S. Attorney General. Did he even know his son had been on trial? Would he care after years of estrangement? With trembling hands, Andrea began, composing an encrypted message that would reach the highest law enforcement official in the country. Anthony Jackson sat at the head of a conference table in the Justice Department, surrounded by his senior staff, as they debated a major human trafficking operation. At 52, he carried himself with the confident authority earned through decades of prosecutorial success. His tailored suit and commanding presence reflected his position as U.S. Attorney General, the first black man to hold the office. His executive assistant slipped into the room discreetly, placing a note beside his water glass. "Urgent secure call, private line only." Anthony frowned slightly but continued the meeting for another 10 minutes before calling a short break. Once alone in his office, he dialed the secure number provided. "This is Andrea Wilson, court reporter, from Westlake County Circuit Court," a nervous voice answered. "Mr. Attorney General, I have information about your son, Marcus." Anthony's grip tightened on the phone. "My son? What about my son?" He hadn't spoken to Marcus in nearly 8 years, not since the bitter divorce from his ex-wife, Vanessa, had driven a wedge between them. "Sir, I just witnessed Judge Richard Coleman sentence your son to life in prison without parole for alleged drug dealing," Andrea explained, her voice shaking. "The trial was a sham, and I have evidence the judge deliberately railroaded him." Anthony listened in stunned silence as Andrea played the recording of Coleman's incriminating phone call. His professional composure cracked, revealing the father beneath the title. "Send me everything. Trial transcripts, recordings, evidence files. Use the secure upload link I'm about to text you." After ending the call, Anthony stood at his office window overlooking Washington, D.C., conflicting emotions warring within him. As Attorney General, he had sworn to uphold justice impartially. Using his position to intervene in his son's case could be seen as corruption itself. Yet, as a father, how could he not act when his son had been wrongfully convicted? Memories flooded, back of a 6-year-old Marcus, sitting on his lap in his prosecutor's office, proudly wearing a replica of his father's tie. Of teaching him to ride a bike on weekends between trial preparations. Of the growing distance as his career demanded more time, as the marriage deteriorated, as he chose ambition over family. The divorce had been ugly. Vanessa had taken Marcus across the country to California, and Anthony had allowed his hurt and pride to keep him from fighting harder for a relationship with his son. Phone calls had become emails, emails had become birthday cards, and eventually even those had stopped. His rise through the Justice Department ranks had consumed him, his fight for equal justice becoming a substitute for the family he'd lost. Now, his son faced a lifetime behind bars for a crime he likely didn't commit, sentenced by a judge with clear racial bias. Anthony began methodically reviewing Andrea's files, his prosecutor's mind analyzing the case. The evidence was flimsy at best, possibly planted. The trial record showed dozens of procedural violations. Coleman's history revealed a pattern of harsher sentences for minorities. Anthony initiated a discreet background investigation into Judge Coleman through trusted FBI channels. The results revealed Coleman had sentenced black defendants to terms 23 times longer than white defendants for identical crimes. He had connections to local police leadership, the district attorney's office, and several politicians who had appointed him to the bench. Anthony faced an agonizing dilemma. The proper protocol would be to refer the matter to the State Attorney General or Judicial Conduct Board. But those same entities had ignored complaints about Coleman for years. Using federal authority could be seen as overreach, especially given his personal connection. After a sleepless night, Anthony made his decision. He created a special Justice Department task force to investigate judicial corruption in Westlake County under the guise of a broader national initiative. He appointed his most trusted deputy, James Washington, to lead it, ensuring his own direct involvement would be limited. "We'll approach this by the book," Anthony told Washington, "but make no mistake, I want every stone turned. If Coleman is corrupting the system, I want him and everyone connected exposed." It was a small victory in what Anthony knew would be a long battle. As the task force began its work, Anthony sent a message to the prison where Marcus was being processed. "Tell him his father knows, and tell him I'm coming. What would you do if the justice system failed your child? Comment number 1 if you would use every resource to save them, or number 2 if you believe the system should work without intervention. Hit that like button if you believe in equal justice for all, and subscribe to follow this father's desperate battle against corruption." But could Anthony save his son without destroying his own career? Was he already too late? Marcus's first days in Blackwater State Penitentiary unfolded like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. The processing alone stripped away his humanity, photographed, fingerprinted, strip-searched, and deloused like an animal. They issued him ill-fitting prison blues 2 sizes too large, as if to emphasize how little he mattered now. His student ID, wallet, watch, and the small cross necklace his grandmother had given him were sealed in a property bag, along with his former identity. The moment he entered the general population, Marcus felt predatory eyes tracking his every move. At 17, despite his 6-foot frame built from years of basketball, he was still visibly the youngest inmate in the adult facility. His smooth skin and obvious fear made him an immediate target. "Fresh meat don't last long here without friends," muttered an inmate as Marcus made his way to his assigned cell. That night, alone on the bottom bunk of a 6x8 cell, Marcus curled into himself and silently wept, careful not to make a sound that might display weakness. The distant screams and clanging metal doors created a soundtrack to his despair. By the 3rd day, 2 white inmates had cornered him in the shower. Only the timely intervention of a correctional officer prevented an assault, though the officer later told Marcus, "Next time, I might not be around. Learn to handle yourself or become someone's property." Marcus realized with horror that the guards viewed such attacks as inevitable, perhaps even deserved. The only person who showed him any kindness was his cellmate, Tyrell Washington, a 62-year-old, former civil rights activist serving the final years of a 30-year sentence for allegedly assaulting officers during a protest in the 1990s. Tyrell recognized something in Marcus that others didn't bother to see. "You don't belong here, young blood," Tyrell said one night after lights out. "I can tell. Keep your head down, stay close to me when you can, and whatever you do, don't join Damon's crew no matter what they offer." Damon Reed ran the most powerful gang in Blackwater, controlling contraband, protection rackets, and with several guards on his payroll. Within Marcus's first week, Damon approached him in the yard. "A smart young brother like you could be useful," Damon said, sizing Marcus up. "We protect our own in here. All you gotta do is help us with some business." Marcus knew business meant smuggling drugs. "Thank you, but I'm just trying to keep to myself," he replied cautiously. Damon's friendly demeanor vanished. "Nobody says no to me, college boy. You'll learn." The beating came 2 days later in a blind spot between security cameras. 4 of Damon's men held Marcus down while Damon methodically broke 2 of his ribs and blackened both eyes. "First lessons, free," Damon whispered before walking away. When guards finally found Marcus, they dragged him to the infirmary where Dr. Patterson barely examined him before declaring, "Just another fight. Take some ibuprofen and learn to defend yourself." No incident report was filed. No questions asked about his attackers. While recovering in the infirmary, Marcus overheard two guards discussing Judge Coleman's upcoming visit to the prison. One mentioned that the judge likes to see his special cases adjusting to their new home. Marcus realized with growing horror that his case wasn't unique. Coleman had a history of sending young black men to Blackwater. Back in his cell, Tyrell helped Marcus cope with his injuries using techniques learned over decades of prison survival. Coleman's been sending young brothers here for years, Tyrell confirmed. Always on drug charges, always with maximum sentences, always based on evidence that appears out of nowhere. Why would he do that? Marcus asked through pain-gritted teeth. Follow the money, young blood. Always follow the money. Through careful observation and conversations with other inmates, Marcus learned that Judge Coleman's son, Tyler Coleman, controlled drug distribution within the prison, working with selected guards and Damon's gang. The operation was sophisticated, with profits flowing to offshore accounts. Marcus began documenting everything in a makeshift journal, created from commissary receipt paper, hidden inside his thin mattress. He recorded conversations, guard schedules, exchanges he witnessed, and the strange protection certain inmates received. For weeks, Marcus tried sending letters to legal aid organizations, but they never received responses. He later discovered, from a sympathetic kitchen worker, that the mailroom had special instructions regarding his communications. Everything he sent out was being intercepted. Just when Marcus was losing hope, Tyrell saved him from a second, potentially fatal attack. In the laundry room. Using skills from his younger days, the old man managed to hold off two of Damon's men long enough for Marcus to escape. The incident cost Tyrell 2 broken fingers and a week in solitary confinement for starting a fight. But it bought Marcus credibility with other inmates tired of Damon's control. Your enemy's enemy is your friend, Tyrell told Marcus when he returned from solitary. We just need to stay alive long enough for someone on the outside to notice what's happening in here. The next morning, a guard Marcus had never seen before approached his cell. Jackson, you've got a visitor. Special authorization, processing room in 10 minutes. Marcus followed, suspicious of a trap, until the guard added, It's your father. In the small visitation room, separated by plexiglass, Marcus came face to face with the man he hadn't seen in 8 years. Despite the sharp suit and authoritative presence, Anthony Jackson's eyes revealed what Marcus had never expected to see: fear, regret, and determination. The visiting room fell silent as Anthony Jackson sat down across from his son. Neither spoke for several painful seconds, taking in the changes 8 years had wrought. Marcus's face, once soft with childhood, now bore the hardened edges of premature adulthood and fresh bruises. Anthony's hair had grayed at the temples, deep lines etching his once familiar features. How you look like hell, Anthony finally said, his voice catching slightly. Prison will do that, Marcus replied coldly. What are you doing here? 8 years of nothing and now you show up? Anthony leaned forward. I didn't know about your arrest or the trial, Marcus. Your mother didn't contact me. Marcus laughed bitterly. Why would she? You made it pretty clear your job was more important than us. Guess what? Now your job is the only reason I'm talking to you. The accusation hit Anthony like a physical blow. I deserve that, but right now what matters is getting you out of here. I know about Judge Coleman. I know the trial was fixed. Marcus's eyes narrowed. So the mighty Attorney General is going to swoop in and save the day, going to use your power to help your son when you couldn't be bothered to even call on my birthdays. Anthony absorbed the anger, recognizing it as justified. I can't change the past, Marcus, but I can fight for your future if you'll let me. Tell me everything that happened. Everything. Slowly, reluctantly, Marcus began sharing details of his arrest, the sham trial, and the corruption he'd witnessed inside Blackwater. As he spoke, Anthony's professional composure cracked, revealing glimpses of rage and grief. Coleman has connections inside this prison, Marcus explained. His son runs the drug trade here with the warden's knowledge. The same drugs they sent me away for. Anthony nodded grimly. I've started an investigation, but it needs to be by the book. Using my position to directly intervene would undermine the case. So I'm just supposed to survive in here while you follow procedures? Marcus asked incredulously. Do you see my face? This is after only 2 weeks. How am I supposed to last months or years? Anthony reached toward the plexiglass separating them, an instinctive gesture to comfort his son. I'm working as fast as I can. I've got my best people on this. But I need your help from the inside. Any documentation, names, patterns you've noticed? Marcus hesitated, then whispered, I've been keeping notes. My cellmate Tyrell has been helping me. He's protected me as much as he can. As Marcus continued sharing information, a guard approached. Officer Reynolds, a heavy-set man with cold eyes, interrupted abruptly. Time's up. Warden says the visit's over. We're scheduled for 30 minutes, Anthony objected, flashing his Justice Department credentials. We've only had 15. Special. Instructions, sir? Reynolds replied with barely concealed satisfaction. Security concerns. As Marcus was led away, he called back, Dad, the journal is with Tyrell. Hidden in... But the closing door cut off his words. Anthony remained seated, noting Reynolds' name and badge number. The message was clear. Someone had been listening and didn't like what they heard. Within hours of the visit, Marcus was abruptly transferred to solitary confinement. The official reason, contraband found in his cell during a random search. In reality, guards had torn apart his living space looking for his journal, confiscating letters, books, and personal items in the process. In the 6x9 concrete box that would be his home for the next 30 days, Marcus lay on a steel bunk with only a thin mat between his body and the metal. The fluorescent lights remained on 24 hours a day, making sleep nearly impossible. A guard banged on his door hourly, preventing any rest. Daddy can't help you in here, taunted Officer Reynolds during meal delivery. Attorney General, or not, he's got no jurisdiction over state corrections. Judge Coleman's brother is our warden, did you know that? Family business, you might say. The psychological torture of solitary confinement, the sensory deprivation, isolation, and constant harassment tested Marcus's resolve. Without windows, he lost track of days and nights. His only human contact came in the form of guards' taunts or the distant screams of other solitary inmates losing their grip on sanity. What kept Marcus going was knowing his father was fighting. So for him, and that Tyrell had managed to hide the duplicate set of notes Marcus had created as insurance. Before the cell raid, Marcus had copied his most damning observations onto scraps of paper hidden inside a hollowed-out library book Tyrell kept. Meanwhile, Anthony faced his own challenges outside. After learning of Marcus's transfer to solitary, he leveraged every legal avenue available to improve his son's conditions. He filed emergency motions for humane treatment, demanded access to his son as legal counsel, and pressured the State Department of Corrections through official channels. Each attempt met bureaucratic resistance. Warden Samuel Coleman, Judge Richard, Coleman's older brother, proved expert at using regulations to obstruct Anthony's efforts while maintaining a veneer of cooperation. We're simply following standard procedures for high-risk inmates, the warden explained in one particularly infuriating phone call. High risk? My son is a 17-year-old first-time offender with no disciplinary issues, Anthony had argued. Who received special attention from the U.S. Attorney General, Warden Coleman replied smoothly. Such attention creates security concerns for both the inmate and our facility. The message was clear. Anthony's very efforts to help Marcus were being weaponized against him. The more he pushed officially, the worse Marcus's treatment became. It was a calculated move to force Anthony to choose between his professional ethics and his son's immediate safety. In his darkest moments alone in his Washington apartment, Anthony confronted the bitter truth. His ambition had cost him his family, and now that same position of power that had seemed so important was proving ineffective at protecting his only child. The system he'd devoted his life to upholding was the very system destroying his son. As Marcus endured his 30th day in solitary confinement, he had no way of knowing his father had finally assembled a team he trusted, or that the investigation into Judge Coleman was gathering momentum. All he knew was that in the morning he would return to general population, where Damon Reed and his crew waited to finish what they'd started. What would you do if your child were wrongfully imprisoned? Comment number 1 if you would risk everything to save them, or number 2 if you believe in working strictly within the system. Like this video if you've ever felt the pain of a broken family trying to heal, and subscribe to see if this father and son can overcome years of estrangement to fight corruption together. But could Anthony earn his son's trust after abandoning him for so long? And was Marcus already too deep in a system designed to destroy him? Back in Washington, Anthony Jackson assembled a small, trusted team in a secure conference room deep within the Justice Department. The blinds were drawn, phones collected at the door, and electronic jamming devices activated to prevent surveillance. This wasn't just another corruption case. It was personal, dangerous, and potentially career-ending if handled improperly. From this moment forward, everything we discuss stays in this room, Anthony told the 4 people seated around the table. What we're investigating could reach into multiple jurisdictions and levels of government. Leading the team was FBI Special Agent Sophia Chen, a 15-year veteran with an impeccable record investigating judicial corruption. Beside her sat James Washington, Anthony's most trusted deputy and former classmate from Howard University Law School. Rounding out the team were data analyst Terrence Williams and Lisa Cooper, an attorney specializing in prosecutorial misconduct. Westlake County shows statistical anomalies that should have triggered federal oversight years ago, Sophia explained, displaying graphs on a secure tablet. Judge Richard Coleman sentences black defendants to terms averaging 12 years longer than white defendants for identical crimes. The disparity is the worst in the country. Anthony nodded grimly. And now we know why no one's investigated. The corruption network is extensive. Over the next 3 weeks, the team meticulously built their case. They discovered Coleman had financial ties to Blackwater Correctional Partners, a private company that operated Blackwater State Penitentiary, under contract with the state. For every inmate sentenced to Blackwater, the company received approximately $50,000 annually from state coffers. More disturbing were the kickback patterns. Each time Coleman sentenced a young offender to Blackwater, a consulting company owned by his wife received payments from subsidiary companies connected to the prison. The money trail was sophisticated but unmistakable. He's essentially selling young black men to the prison, Terrence explained, tracing financial flows across multiple shell companies, predominantly from middle-class families with some assets, but limited legal resources. Families who might be able to make bail but not afford top-tier legal representation. Further investigation revealed Coleman wasn't acting alone. The team uncovered evidence that Westlake County prosecutors deliberately overcharged minority defendants. Police officers planted evidence in at least 12 cases, and public defenders were incentivized to push guilty pleas rather than mount proper defenses. It's like a well-oiled machine, Lisa observed. They target young black men at the cusp of adulthood, ensuring they can be tried as adults with adult sentences, maximizing the financial return for Blackwater. Anthony's jaw tightened as they reviewed Marcus's case file. The officer who allegedly found drugs in Marcus's locker has been involved in 6 similar discoveries at predominantly black schools. Always unlocked lockers, always with no witnesses, always resulting in maximum sentences from Coleman. The investigation hit an unexpected breakthrough when Sophia identified Carol Martinez, a former clerk in Coleman's office who had resigned abruptly the previous year. After careful vetting, they approached her under the guise of a routine judicial performance review. "I couldn't be part of it anymore," Carol confessed, once assured of protection. Judge Coleman keeps separate records for certain cases he calls revenue generators. Young black males, mostly good students, no prior records, perfect targets because no one would believe they were dealing, but who couldn't afford the legal firepower to fight back effectively. Carol provided access codes to a private server where Coleman stored shadow dockets, communications with police about who to target, and correspondence with Warden Coleman about processing special cases. It was the evidence they needed to expand the investigation formally. As Anthony reviewed the growing evidence, he received an unexpected call from his ex-wife, Vanessa. "Why didn't you tell me Marcus was arrested?" he demanded. They threatened. "Me, Anthony," Vanessa replied, her voice breaking. "A detective came to my workplace, said if I contacted you or hired a private attorney, they would charge Marcus as part of a conspiracy that would mean the death penalty. I was terrified." Anthony realized the conspiracy was even more calculated than he'd thought. They had deliberately isolated Marcus from any effective legal assistance, specifically preventing Anthony from learning about the case until after sentencing. With each new discovery, political pressure mounted against the investigation. Several senators with ties to the private prison industry began questioning the Justice Department's unusual interest in a state matter. Anthony's chief of staff reported whispers about improper use of federal resources for personal matters. As the team prepared to bring their evidence to a federal grand jury, disaster struck. Sophia Chen's car veered off the road on her way to a meeting with a potential witness, sending her vehicle plunging down an embankment. The crash investigation revealed her brake lines had been cut. While Sophia recovered in the hospital, Anthony received a plain manila envelope at his home address, an address protected by federal security protocols. Inside was a single photograph of Marcus in his prison cell sleeping, with a makeshift knife held by an unseen hand hovering inches from his throat. The message was clear: back off or Marcus dies. Anthony realized then that his position as Attorney General, far from helping Marcus, had made him a more valuable target. The corruption wasn't confined to a county judge and his brother. It reached into federal agencies, perhaps even his own department. That night, as Anthony stared at the threatening photograph, he made a decision that would change the course of the investigation. He could no longer trust the system he had sworn to uphold. To save his son, he would need to work outside it. Judge Richard Coleman slammed down the phone in his chambers, face flushed with rage. His source in the Justice Department had just confirmed his worst fears. The investigation wasn't just a routine review, but a full-scale federal probe specifically, targeting him and his network. Worse, it was being directed by Anthony Jackson himself. Emergency meeting. Tonight. The usual place, Coleman barked into his cell phone. Tell everyone this is Code Red. That evening, in the private dining room of an exclusive country club outside Westlake County, Coleman addressed his co-conspirators. District Attorney William Hargrove, Police Chief Robert Thompson, 2 state senators, and several business figures, connected to Blackwater Correctional Partners. Notably absent was his brother Samuel, who remained at the prison managing their most immediate vulnerability, Marcus Jackson. We have a serious problem, Coleman announced. The Attorney General himself is coming after us, and it's personal. His son is the Jackson kid I sentenced last month. How the hell did we miss that connection? Hargrove demanded. Different last name on the mother's side. She remarried, Coleman replied dismissively. Doesn't matter now. What matters is shutting this down before they get to our financials. Chief Thompson leaned forward. Can't your brother just arrange an accident for the kid? Problem solved. Coleman shook his head. Too obvious now that they're watching. We need to discredit Jackson, make it impossible for him to continue the investigation without appearing corrupt himself. Their plan was threefold. First, file ethics complaints against Anthony for using his position to help a family member. Second, launch a media campaign portraying the investigation as federal overreach and abuse of power. And third, systematically eliminate or compromise evidence before federal agents could secure it. The counterattack began immediately. Senator William Phillips, chairman of the Judiciary Oversight Committee, publicly questioned Anthony's objectivity and called for his recusal from any investigations involving Westlake County. Conservative media outlets ran stories with headlines like Attorney General abuses power for family vendetta and Federal overreach, Jackson targets, local judge over son's legitimate conviction. Inside the Justice Department, Anthony discovered crucial documents mysteriously disappearing from secured files. Digital evidence became corrupted, witness statements were altered, and case notes went missing. Someone with high-level access was systematically undermining the investigation from within. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carol Martinez, the former clerk who had provided initial evidence, contacted Sophia Chen through an encrypted channel. I kept backups of everything, she revealed. After what happened to the last person who tried to expose Coleman, I wasn't taking chances. Carol had stored duplicate records on servers outside the country, beyond Coleman's reach. The evidence was comprehensive. Financial transactions, communications, altered court records, and even recordings of meetings where Coleman and his associates openly discussed their scheme. Just as Anthony thought they were regaining momentum, his chief of staff, Michael Reynolds, betrayed him. Reynolds, who had been placed in Anthony's office years earlier as Coleman's mole, leaked selective information to the Senate Judiciary Committee, painting Anthony's investigation as a rogue operation motivated by personal revenge rather than evidence. Attorney General Jackson has become obsessed with persecuting Judge Coleman, Reynolds told the committee. He's diverted significant department resources without proper authorization and pressured agents to find evidence where none exists. The testimony triggered formal hearings into Anthony's conduct. Senator Phillips called for his immediate resignation. The American people cannot trust a man who abuses his office to settle family matters, Phillips declared to reporters. If Jackson won't recuse himself, he must step down. As political pressure mounted, Anthony received increasingly explicit threats against his family. Photos of his elderly mother outside her nursing home appeared on his secure phone. Pictures of Marcus's half-sister at her middle school basketball practice arrived by courier. Each came with the same message: walk away or bury them. Meanwhile, Marcus faced escalating danger inside Blackwater. Warden Coleman, realizing the threat posed by the Attorney General's investigation, transferred Marcus to the maximum security wing, housing the most violent offenders. Marcus was deliberately placed in a cell block known for attacks on younger inmates. Special delivery from the warden, the guard announced loudly as he escorted Marcus to his new cell. Attorney General's son, boys. Show him some Blackwater hospitality. Word spread quickly through the wing that Marcus was connected. Some inmates saw him as a potential threat, someone who might expose their own illegal activities inside the prison. Others viewed him as leverage. Hurting the Attorney General's son could earn favors from the warden. When Marcus entered the yard for the first time, he found himself surrounded by members of rival gangs, all eyeing him with predatory interest. The guards watching from the towers made no move to intervene as tensions escalated. Dr. Patterson, the prison physician who had dismissed Marcus's previous injuries, now refused to provide prescribed medication for his asthma. Budget cuts, he explained with a smirk. Not enough medicine for everybody. All communication with the outside world was severed. Marcus's phone privileges were revoked for security reasons. His mail was held indefinitely for inspection. Even his limited legal communications with his father's team were intercepted. What the warden didn't anticipate was Marcus's growing influence among certain inmates. During his time in general population, Marcus had helped several men with their legal paperwork, offering insights from his father's books that he had studied in school. He had taught basic math to others preparing for GED exams. These small kindnesses had earned him unexpected allies. One such ally was Victor Ramirez, leader of a Hispanic gang who had lost his brother to a suspicious prison suicide after providing information about guard corruption. Another was James Watson, a former accountant serving time for fraud who recognized the financial scheme Marcus described from the court records. Together, they formed an unlikely coalition from rival factions, united by their shared victimization under Warden Coleman's regime. When Damon Reed's men attempted to attack Marcus in the shower block, they found themselves intercepted by Victor's crew. The ensuing standoff created an uneasy stalemate that temporarily protected Marcus. Recognizing the growing threat of inmate organization, Warden Coleman ordered a lockdown, limiting movement and interaction. But the seed had been planted. Whispered conversations during mealtimes, notes passed during work details, and coded messages tapped through cell walls spread Marcus's story throughout the prison. The breaking point came when Marcus suffered a severe asthma attack and was denied medical attention. As he collapsed in the yard, gasping for breath, dozens of inmates began a coordinated protest, refusing to return to their cells. The unprecedented solidarity forced the guards to finally transport Marcus to the medical unit. While Marcus fought for breath, Anthony fought for his career and his son's life. The Senate hearing on his conduct was scheduled for the following week. Without a major breakthrough, he would likely be removed from office, leaving Marcus at the mercy of a system controlled by his enemies. Do you believe corruption like this exists in our justice system? Comment number 1 if you think we need more accountability for those in power, or number 2 if you feel these are isolated incidents. Like this video if you're standing against injustice, and subscribe for the dramatic conclusion of this power struggle between a desperate father and a corrupt system. But could Anthony survive the political attacks long enough to save Marcus? And could Marcus stay alive as the warden's patience ran out? The maximum security wing of Blackwater Penitentiary resembled a concrete tomb. 3 tiers of cells stacked along grimy walls, constant echoes of metal doors and shouted obscenities, and the pervasive stench of industrial disinfectant, barely, masking bodily odors. For Marcus, it represented a calculated escalation in the warden's attempts to break him physically and mentally. His new cell, barely wider than his arm span, contained only a metal toilet sink combination and a steel bunk. With a mattress so thin, he could feel every coil beneath him. His cellmate, a heavily tattooed man serving triple life sentences for murdering 3 correctional officers at another facility, eyed Marcus with predatory interest. "So you're the Attorney General's kid," the man said on Marcus's first night. "Warden must really want you dead to put you with me." Guards made no secret of Marcus's identity, announcing it loudly during count times and meal distributions. "Special treatment for the government big shots boy," they would say, ensuring every violent offender knew exactly who Marcus was. The calculated exposure worked. During his first week in maximum security, Marcus narrowly avoided 3 separate ambush attempts in the shower block, the yard, and the mess hall. Each time he escaped serious injury only through quick reflexes and the intervention of inmates who had their own reasons to oppose the warden's regime. Dr. Patterson continued to withhold Marcus's asthma medication, claiming inventory issues, despite the prison pharmacy being fully stocked. Without his inhaler, Marcus struggled during exercise periods and woke gasping for breath on nights when anxiety tightened his chest. Communication with the outside world ceased entirely. Letters from his mother were lost in processing. Legal communications from his father's team were accidentally delivered to other inmates. Phone privileges were revoked due to technical issues with the system. "Your daddy can't reach you." "Here," Warden Coleman told Marcus during a rare face-to-face meeting, "this is my house, and in my house, you're just another inmate who needs to learn his place." Marcus quickly realized the warden's strategy went beyond simple intimidation. Samuel Coleman was systematically trying to provoke an incident that would justify deadly force. Guards deliberately placed Marcus in situations with known violent offenders. They accidentally opened his cell during times when rival gang members were in the corridor. Each scenario was designed to end with Marcus severely injured or dead, with plausible deniability for the administration. What the warden hadn't counted on was Marcus's growing influence among certain inmate factions. Victor Ramirez, whose brother had died under suspicious circumstances in Blackwater, recognized in Marcus a potential ally against the administration. James Watson, the former accountant, saw an opportunity to expose the financial corruption he had documented during his prison job in the administrative office. Most surprising was the support from Darius Williams, a former gang leader serving 20 years who had undergone a personal transformation and now served as a respected mediator between rival groups. Darius had lost his nephew to Judge Coleman's sentencing practices and recognized the larger pattern affecting their communities. Together, these unlikely allies formed a protective network around Marcus, sharing resources, information, and security. When guards orchestrated conflicts, this informal coalition would intervene, creating human barriers between Marcus and potential attackers. The breaking point came during a yard period when 2 known prison enforcers approached Marcus with makeshift knives. Before they could strike, 20 inmates from different factions positioned themselves between the attackers and Marcus. The show of unity shocked both the would-be assailants and the guards watching from the towers. "We got your back, young blood," Darius told Marcus afterward. "Not because of who your daddy is, but because of what they're doing to all our people." Recognizing the growing threat of prisoner solidarity, Warden Coleman escalated his tactics. He ordered a full lockdown of the maximum security wing, restricting all movement and confining inmates to their cells 23 hours a day. Meals were reduced in size and quality. Water was shut off for maintenance for hours at a time. Random cell searches destroyed personal property and legal papers. Despite these measures, Marcus and his allies developed ingenious communication methods. They used Morse code tapped on pipes that connected cells. They passed tiny notes through gaps in cell doors during meal deliveries. They developed a coded language, using references to sports teams and players that guards wouldn't recognize as significant. Through this underground network, Marcus proposed a coordinated response that would attract outside attention without resorting to violence. Drawing on historical examples of civil rights protests his father had once taught him about, Marcus suggested a hunger strike. "They can explain away violence," Marcus told his allies through their coded messages, "but they can't hide dozens of us refusing to eat at the same time." The hunger strike began quietly, with Marcus and 15 others simply returning their meal trays untouched. By the third day, over 60 inmates were participating. By the fifth day, when media began reporting on the unusual protest, over 100 maximum security prisoners had joined. Warden Coleman responded with brutal force. Strike leaders were dragged to solitary confinement. Guards accidentally left hot water turned off in specific cell blocks. Commissary privileges were revoked for the entire wing. When these measures failed to break the strike, the warden authorized a compliance inspection, prison code for a militarized raid on targeted cells. At 3 in the morning on the strike's 7th day, tactical units in riot gear stormed the maximum security wing. Armed with pepper spray, tasers, and batons, they dragged inmates from cells, forcing them face down in the corridors. Marcus was specifically targeted, receiving the most brutal treatment, as guards slammed him repeatedly into walls while cameras were conveniently malfunctioning. The official report would later claim inmates had become combative during routine searches, necessitating appropriate use of force. The reality witnessed by dozens was a coordinated assault designed to break the protest through terror and pain. Marcus suffered 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a concussion, severe enough to leave him unconscious for hours. When he finally received medical attention, Dr. Patterson spent less than 2 minutes examining him before declaring him fit for return to his cell, despite clear signs of concussion. The breaking point came when Marcus began suffering seizures. In his cell, his brain swelling from untreated head trauma. Even hardened guards were disturbed by his deteriorating condition. A night shift nurse, risking her job, called an ambulance against the warden's explicit instructions. At the county hospital, beyond the warden's direct control, doctors documented Marcus's injuries and immediately recognized signs of severe abuse. One doctor, appalled by what she saw, contacted a prison rights organization with photographs and medical records. Meanwhile, Marcus, barely conscious in his hospital bed, managed to whisper crucial information to a hospital volunteer who brought him water. The volunteer, a retired teacher named Eleanor Johnson, carefully memorized his message, and the moment her shift ended, made a call to a number Marcus had provided. That call, reaching Anthony's secure line, finally provided the confirmation he needed that his son was in immediate, life-threatening danger. The evidence of prison abuse, documented by medical professionals outside the warden's influence, gave Anthony the leverage he needed for emergency intervention. As Marcus fought for his life in the hospital, the warden received an unexpected call from his brother, Judge Coleman. "They've got medical records," the judge said, his voice tense. "This has gone too far, Sam. We need to back off before this explodes." But it was already too late. The prison rights organization had filed an emergency petition with a federal judge for Marcus's release into protective custody. Anthony's team had submitted the medical evidence to the FBI's Civil Rights Division. And, most damaging of all, Eleanor Johnson had recorded her conversation with several nurses, describing the warden's explicit instructions to deny Marcus proper medical care. The hunger strike had achieved exactly what Marcus had hoped. It had created a crack in the warden's wall of control, allowing outside eyes to witness what was happening within Blackwater's walls. But as Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness, he remained unaware that his actions had finally created the breakthrough his father needed. Cameron Torres had been a reporter with the Washington Post for 15 years, specializing in criminal justice issues. When a padded envelope arrived at his desk with no return address, his journalistic instincts immediately heightened. Inside was a flash drive, a handwritten letter, and several photographs that made his stomach turn. The drive contained thousands of documents, court transcripts showing Judge Richard Coleman's blatant bias in sentencing black defendants, financial records tracing payments from Blackwater Correctional Partners to Coleman family businesses, and internal prison communications detailing the targeted abuse of specific inmates, including Marcus Jackson. The anonymous letter explained the connection between Marcus and Attorney General Anthony Jackson, detailing how the father-son relationship had been deliberately concealed to prevent Anthony's intervention. The photos showed Marcus's injuries after the prison raid, taken by the hospital staff who had treated him. After careful verification of the document's authenticity, Torres published a front-page exposé titled "Justice for Sale: How a Judge's Racism Feeds the Prison Pipeline." The article meticulously detailed Coleman's pattern of disproportionate sentencing, the financial incentives behind those decisions, and the systematic abuse of prisoners who attempted to expose the corruption. Statistical analysis reveals Judge Coleman sentences black defendants to terms averaging 12 years longer than white defendants for identical crimes, Torres wrote. In cases involving young black males with no prior records, like 17-year-old honor student Marcus Jackson, Coleman consistently imposes maximum sentences based on minimal or questionable evidence. The article included side-by-side comparisons of cases with nearly identical circumstances, but drastically different outcomes, based solely on the defendant's race. It revealed Coleman had sentenced 43 young black men to Blackwater in the past 3 years, compared to only 2 white defendants facing similar charges. Within hours of publication, social media exploded with outrage. The hashtag #ChaJusticeForMarcus began trending nationwide as readers shared Torres's article. Civil rights organizations issued statements demanding federal investigation. Law school professors began analyzing Coleman's sentencing patterns, confirming the racial disparities Torres had identified. Judge Coleman attempted damage control, scheduling a press conference where he dismissed the allegations as playing the race card and claimed the discrepancies in sentencing reflected different circumstances not apparent in simplified statistics. His dismissive attitude only fueled public anger, especially when video clips of his statement spread across social media. "I've sentenced plenty of, those people to reasonable terms when their behavior warranted it," Coleman said in one particularly damaging moment, the racial subtext unmistakable. As public scrutiny intensified, cracks in Coleman's support system began to appear. Local politicians who had previously defended him released statements expressing concern about the allegations. The State Bar Association announced an ethics investigation into his conduct. Several attorneys began reviewing past cases for potential appeals based on judicial bias. Prison rights advocates organized protests outside Blackwater Penitentiary and the Westlake County Courthouse. Family members of other young men sentenced by Coleman came forward with similar stories of excessive sentences for minor offenses or questionable evidence. Their testimonies painted a picture of systematic targeting of young black men in the community. For Anthony Jackson, the public exposure provided critical leverage, though it came at a professional cost. The Senate Judiciary Committee continued, pressing for his recusal, now arguing that the high-profile nature of the case made his involvement even more inappropriate. Several senators suggested the entire controversy was a manufactured media campaign orchestrated by Anthony himself. Behind the scenes, Anthony's investigation gained momentum as witnesses became more willing to speak. Carol Martinez provided additional documents showing Coleman had instructed court staff to ensure black defendants received court-appointed attorneys known for providing minimal defense. Another clerk revealed Coleman routinely met with prosecutors before trials to discuss desired sentencing outcomes. The State Judicial Conduct Board, responding to mounting pressure, convened an emergency hearing to consider Coleman's suspension. Anthony, legally restricted from direct involvement due to his relationship with Marcus, worked through intermediaries to ensure the board received all relevant evidence. In the most dramatic moment of the hearing, court reporter Andrea Wilson testified about Coleman's history of racist comments and the recorded phone call following Marcus's sentencing. Despite receiving death threats, Andrea played the recording for the board. It's done. The Jackson boy won't be a problem anymore. Other court staff, emboldened by Andrea's courage, came forward with similar recordings captured during breaks or in chambers. One particularly damning clip captured Coleman telling a prosecutor, "These young thugs need to learn their place. Maximum sentences send a message to the rest of them." Coleman's defense team argued the recordings were taken out of context or selectively edited to create false impressions. They presented character witnesses, primarily white attorneys and local officials, who testified to Coleman's fairness and integrity. Several claimed the entire controversy was politically motivated by liberal groups targeting conservative judges. Despite these efforts, the evidence proved overwhelming. Statistical experts presented analyses showing the mathematical impossibility of Coleman's sentencing disparities occurring by chance. Financial investigators traced complex money flows between Blackwater Correctional Partners and various Coleman family enterprises. Former defendants testified about their experiences in Coleman's courtroom. After 3 days of testimony, the Judicial Conduct Board voted to suspend Coleman pending a full investigation, an unprecedented action against a sitting judge in the state. The decision represented a significant victory, but Anthony knew it was only the beginning of a longer battle. That evening, as Anthony reviewed the board's findings in his office, his secure phone buzzed with an incoming message. The screen displayed photos of Marcus in his hospital room, clearly taken within the past hour, with an attached message: "Suspension won't protect him. Back off completely or say goodbye." Anthony immediately dispatched federal marshals to strengthen security at the hospital, but he knew the threat was credible. Despite Coleman's suspension, his brother still controlled Blackwater and had allies throughout local law enforcement. Marcus remained vulnerable as long as he remained within their reach. The situation deteriorated further when hospital security cameras captured an unidentified man in medical scrubs attempting to enter Marcus's room during a shift change. When stopped by a guard, the man claimed to be a new staff member before quickly disappearing. The incident confirmed Anthony's fears. The warden was growing desperate as his brother's protection crumbled. Prison officials continued refusing to transfer Marcus to federal custody, citing administrative procedures and jurisdictional limitations. Anthony knew these were delay tactics, giving the warden time to eliminate the greatest threat to their operation, the living proof of their corruption. As public pressure mounted and Marcus's safety hung in the balance, Anthony faced the most difficult decision of his career. Following proper channels would take weeks of legal maneuvers, time Marcus likely didn't have. Acting outside those channels would give his opponents the ammunition they needed to remove him from office and potentially invalidate the entire investigation. In his darkest moment, Anthony received unexpected support from a former Supreme Court justice who privately advised him, "Sometimes protecting justice means working outside a corrupted system. Do what you must to save your son, then rebuild the system properly." Do you believe our justice system sometimes requires working outside official channels to achieve true justice? Comment number 1, if you think the ends justify the means when fighting corruption, or number 2, if proper procedures should always be followed regardless of consequences. Like this video if you've ever had to make a difficult choice between what's right and what's allowed, and subscribe to find out what Anthony decides in his desperate race to save Marcus. But would saving his son mean sacrificing everything he'd worked for? And was Marcus already too deep in a system designed to destroy him? The Judicial Conduct Board convened in the imposing marble courthouse in the state capital, far from Judge Coleman's home jurisdiction. Security was unprecedented. Federal marshals swept the building for devices, screened all attendees, and established a secure perimeter against potential threats or protests. Coleman arrived with an impressive legal team led by Martin Reynolds, a former state Supreme Court justice known for his conservative opinions and powerful connections. Their confident strides into the hearing room projected an image of men inconvenienced by baseless accusations, rather than officials facing career-ending evidence. This hearing is nothing more than a politically motivated witch hunt, Reynolds announced to reporters outside. Judge Coleman has served with distinction for 20 years. These allegations come from criminals unhappy with their justified sentences and a federal official with a personal vendetta. Inside, the 5-member board, 3 judges and 2 attorneys, prepared to hear evidence that would determine whether Coleman could continue serving on the bench while under investigation. Anthony, prohibited from direct involvement due to his relationship with Marcus, watched from Washington via secure video feed as his team presented their case. Court reporter Andrea Wilson was the first witness, visibly nervous but determined as she described Coleman's pattern of behavior. Despite death threats that had forced her into temporary relocation, she detailed how Coleman conducted different types of proceedings based on defendants' race. For white defendants, Judge Coleman conducted thorough reviews of evidence and considered mitigating factors, Andrea testified. For black defendants, particularly young men, he would rush proceedings, dismiss character witnesses, and consistently impose maximum sentences regardless of circumstances. Andrea's testimony included multiple recordings from Coleman's courtroom, captured by the official court reporting system during what Coleman thought were private conversations. In one damning clip, Coleman could be heard telling a prosecutor, "During a break, make sure we get at least 15 years on this one. These basketball scholarships don't mean anything if they're selling poison in our neighborhoods." Coleman's attorneys objected vigorously, claiming the recordings violated judicial privacy expectations. When overruled, they shifted to claiming the comments were taken out of context or reflected legitimate concerns about community safety rather than racial bias. Throughout the morning, a parade of court staff testified to Coleman's differential treatment of defendants based on race. A bailiff described how Coleman would use different tones and language, depending on the defendant's race. A clerk detailed how scheduling was manipulated to ensure certain defense attorneys were assigned to minority defendants. Coleman's team countered with testimony from several attorneys who practiced in his court, all claiming they had never witnessed discriminatory behavior. Most notable was District Attorney William Hargrove, who insisted Coleman was tough but fair and treated all defendants according to the nature of their crimes rather than their race. The most powerful testimony came from Dr. Elaine Simmons, a statistical expert who had analyzed thousands of Coleman's sentencing decisions over 15 years. Her presentation included charts and graphs demonstrating irrefutable racial disparities that could not be explained by any factor other than bias. The mathematical probability of these sentencing patterns occurring randomly is less than 1 in 10 million, Dr. Simmons testified. When controlling for all relevant legal factors, criminal history, nature of offense, evidence quality, black defendants consistently received sentences 65% longer than white defendants for identical crimes in Judge Coleman's courtroom. As the evidence mounted, Coleman's demeanor changed from confident dismissal to visible anger. During breaks, reporters noted his flushed face and tense conversations with his legal team. His supporters in the gallery dwindled as the hearings continued, with several leaving after particularly damaging testimony. The board next heard from 3 former defendants who had received dramatically different sentences from Coleman, despite similar circumstances. 2 young white men who had received probation for drug possession stood in stark contrast to Jerome Williams, a black former honor student now serving 15 years for an almost identical offense. Coleman's attorneys attempted to distinguish the cases based on community factors and rehabilitative potential, but their arguments only highlighted the subjective nature of Coleman's decision-making process and its consistently racial outcomes. By the 3rd day of hearings, public attention had reached unprecedented levels. News networks broadcast live from outside the courthouse. Social media campaigns calling for Coleman's removal grew exponentially. Legal experts debated the case on television, with most concluding the evidence of bias was overwhelming. In a surprising development, Several judges from neighboring counties submitted a joint letter to the board expressing concern about Coleman's conduct and the damage it was causing to public trust in the judiciary. The unprecedented action by sitting judges signaled a significant shift in institutional support away from Coleman. For the defense's final presentation, Coleman himself took the stand, projecting indignation rather than contrition. "I have dedicated my career to upholding the law without fear or favor," he insisted. "These statistics fail to account for the nuanced decisions judges must make based on intangible factors that numbers can't capture." When questioned about specific cases, including Marcus's, Coleman became defensive. "The Jackson boy had drugs in his locker. The jury found him guilty. I simply imposed the sentence the legislature determined appropriate for such serious crimes." Under more intensive questioning, Coleman's facade began to crack. When confronted with his recorded statements about Marcus, he claimed they referred to administrative matters rather than personal satisfaction. When pressed about financial connections to Blackwater Correctional Partners, he dismissed them as routine investments that didn't influence his judicial decisions. As the hearing concluded, the board retired to deliberate. Outside, demonstrators gathered with signs demanding justice for Marcus and end racist sentencing. Local community leaders held prayer vigils for all the young men affected by Coleman's practices over the years. After 4 hours of deliberation, the board returned with their decision. In a unanimous vote, they suspended Coleman from the bench pending full investigation of the allegations. The chair cited substantial evidence of judicial misconduct that undermines public confidence in the administration of justice. Coleman's response was immediate and threatening. As he left the courthouse, he told reporters, "This temporary setback will be corrected on appeal. Meanwhile, those who orchestrated this circus will face consequences for their actions." That evening, as Anthony reviewed the board's written findings, his security team intercepted another threat. Photos of Marcus in his hospital room with medical equipment clearly visible, taken within hours despite the increased security. The attached message was explicit. "Final warning, end all investigations or we end him." Anthony immediately ordered enhanced protection for Marcus, but hospital administrators, under pressure from local officials allied with Coleman, resisted federal security protocols, creating dangerous gaps in coverage. Anthony knew that formal requests for Marcus's transfer to federal medical facilities would take days to process, time Marcus likely didn't have. The following morning, Anthony's worst fears materialized when Marcus's hospital room was breached. During shift change, a man in maintenance uniform gained access to the floor through service elevators, bypassing main security checkpoints. Only the fortuitous arrival of a federal marshal on an unscheduled check prevented what would likely have been a fatal attack. The incident confirmed what Anthony had suspected. Judge Coleman and his brother, the warden, were growing desperate as their network unraveled. With Coleman suspended and investigations expanding, they now viewed Marcus as both a liability and a means of leverage. His survival threatened their freedom. His death would devastate Anthony and potentially derail the case. Prison officials continued obstructing formal transfers, claiming jurisdictional issues and procedural requirements. Hospital administrators, caught between federal authorities and local pressure, provided minimum cooperation. Local police, many with ties to Coleman, responded slowly to security concerns. Anthony faced an impossible choice: continue working through proper channels while his son remained in danger, or take extraordinary measures that would give his opponents the ammunition they needed to remove him from office and potentially invalidate the entire investigation. As Marcus lay vulnerable in his hospital bed, still recovering from his injuries, Anthony made the decision that would determine both their fates. Anthony Jackson paced his office at 3 in the morning, the city lights of Washington creating shadows across his face. The secure phone on his desk displayed a message that had arrived 20 minutes earlier. 48 hours to shut down all investigations, or Marcus doesn't make it to the weekend. This is not negotiable. The past week had brought Coleman's network to the breaking point. The judge's suspension had triggered investigations into his financial dealings. 2 prosecutors in his office, had agreed to cooperate with federal authorities. Several prison guards had come forward with information about Warden Coleman's operations at Blackwater. The carefully constructed system of corruption was collapsing. In their desperation, Coleman and his allies had settled on a final strategy, leveraging Marcus's life against Anthony's pursuit of justice. The ultimatum was clear. Anthony could have his son or his case, but not both. Anthony considered his options. Formal transfer requests for Marcus had been deliberately stalled in bureaucratic procedures. Hospital security remained compromised, despite federal reinforcements. Every legal channel faced obstruction from Coleman's allies in local government. The system Anthony had dedicated his life to upholding was now the greatest threat to his son's survival. "I can't do this alone," Anthony realized, picking up the secure phone. 3 hours later, his most trusted team members gathered in a safe house outside Washington. FBI agent Sophia Chen, still recovering from her accident, Deputy Attorney General James Washington, and the newest addition, Cameron Torres, whose reporting had broken the case open. Together they developed an operation outside official channels, a high-risk extraction that would either save Marcus or end Anthony's career. "If this goes wrong, I take full responsibility," Anthony told them. "None of you should risk your careers." "With respect, sir," Sophia replied, her arms still in a sling from her crash. "This stopped being just about careers when they tried to kill both your son and me." Their plan was audacious. Using James's military contacts, they arranged for a private medical transport helicopter, officially contracted for an emergency organ transplant. Several FBI agents not officially assigned to the case volunteered to create a security perimeter at the hospital. A safe house had been prepared at an undisclosed location where a former military doctor would provide continued care for Marcus. The operation was set for 3 a.m. when hospital staffing would be minimal. What Anthony didn't know was that someone within his inner circle had already alerted Coleman's network. When the extraction team arrived at the hospital, they found an ambush waiting. Local police vehicles blocked ambulance access. Hospital security, reinforced with private contractors, denied entry to federal agents. The helicopter was redirected by local air traffic control, citing safety concerns. Every contingency Anthony had planned for had been compromised. As the I-2 situation deteriorated, Anthony received a video call showing Marcus's hospital room. His son lay sleeping, unaware of the armed man standing beside his bed. "Final chance, Attorney General," said a disguised voice. "Order your people to stand down and publicly recuse yourself from all Westlake County matters by noon tomorrow, or your son dies, no negotiations." The call ended, leaving Anthony facing the ultimate choice between justice and family. After years of absence from Marcus's life, would he now sacrifice the truth to save him? Could he abandon all the other victims of Coleman's corruption to protect his own child? The answer came from an unexpected source. As Anthony struggled with his decision, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message from an unknown number. "Don't give up. We've got your son. Check Secure Server Alpha for proof of life." The message came from inside Blackwater Penitentiary. While Coleman's forces had focused on preventing a federal extraction, they had overlooked the network Marcus had built among inmates. Led by Tyrell Washington, Darius Williams, and several other prisoners with connections to hospital staff, an audacious plan had been executed. A kitchen worker who delivered meals to the hospital had switched Marcus's wristband with another patient. A janitor with access to service elevators had helped move Marcus during shift change. A nurse whose brother had been sentenced by Coleman had created false records showing Marcus receiving scheduled treatments. Through a series of small coordinated actions, Marcus had been hidden within the hospital itself, replaced in his room by another patient of similar build. The video Anthony received showed Marcus, weak but alert, in a secure location with Sophia's most trusted agents. "Dad, don't give in," Marcus said. "I'm okay, don't let them win." With Marcus temporarily safe, Anthony executed the second phase of their plan. Rather than fighting through corrupt local authorities, he took the case directly to the public. Cameron Torres published a comprehensive exposé detailing the entire conspiracy, backed by documents, recordings, and testimony from multiple witnesses. At the same time, Anthony submitted formal evidence to the FBI's Civil Rights Division, the State Attorney General's Office, and the federal prosecutor for the district covering Westlake County. By distributing the evidence widely, he ensured no single corrupt official could bury the case. Judge Coleman, realizing the walls were closing in, attempted to flee the country. Airport security cameras captured his confrontation with Anthony, who had anticipated the escape attempt. "Richard Coleman, you're under arrest for judicial corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy against civil rights," Anthony announced as federal agents took the judge into custody. Coleman's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Jackson. You have no idea how deep this goes. I've got friends you've never even heard of. I'll be out on bail before dinner, and then we'll see who survives." Coleman's prediction proved partially correct. Despite the severity of the charges, his political connections secured his release on bail within hours. The judge who set the bail was a former law partner of Coleman's attorney. The conditions of release were minimal, allowing Coleman significant freedom of movement. As predicted, Coleman immediately began contacting allies, attempting to rebuild his defense and neutralize witnesses. What he didn't know was that every communication was now monitored under federal warrants. Each call, each meeting, each threat only strengthened the case against him. After 3 days in a secure location, Marcus was safely transferred to a federal medical facility under round-the-clock protection. For the first time since his wrongful conviction, he could sleep without fear. Though still recovering from his injuries, he began providing formal testimony about his experiences in Blackwater and the corruption he had witnessed. With Marcus safe and Coleman under surveillance, Anthony finally had the opportunity to reunite properly with his son. Their meeting in the secure medical facility was initially tense, years of absence and hurt creating a barrier between them. "Why did you really come back for me?" Marcus asked. "Was it for me or for your case?" "It started with the case," Anthony admitted. "But somewhere along the way I remembered what it meant to be a father. I can't undo the years I missed, Marcus. But if you'll let me, I want to try to make things right." Slowly, cautiously, father and son began rebuilding their relationship. As Marcus shared details of his ordeal, Anthony listened with growing horror and pride. Horror at what his son had endured, pride at how he had survived and fought back. Just as it seemed the worst had passed, Anthony received alarming news. The Justice Department's Internal Investigation Division, under pressure from senators allied with Coleman, had launched a formal probe into Anthony's conduct during the case. Citing his unauthorized use of department resources and conflicts of interest, they recommended his temporary removal from office. The president, facing political pressure from multiple directions, reluctantly placed Anthony on administrative leave pending investigation. Though presented as a routine procedure, the timing was clearly designed to disrupt the case against Coleman and his network. With Anthony temporarily sidelined, Coleman's allies moved quickly to contain the damage. Evidence began disappearing from police storage. Witnesses reported intimidation and threats. The state prosecutor assigned to the case, initially aggressive in pursuing charges, suddenly requested reassignment for personal reasons. Most concerning of all, despite overwhelming evidence against him, Coleman's case showed no signs of moving toward trial. Procedural delays, jurisdictional questions, and legal maneuvers kept pushing potential court dates further into the future. Meanwhile, Coleman remained free on bail, continuing to contact associates and potentially destroy evidence. Marcus, watching these developments from his secure location, recognized the strategy. "They're waiting us out," he told his father during a visit. "They think if they delay long enough, witnesses will disappear, evidence will get lost, and public interest will fade." Anthony nodded grimly. "It's an old playbook, and it often works." Then, "We need a new playbook," Marcus replied, "one they won't expect." As father and son began developing their counter-strategy, neither realized they were about to uncover the true extent of the conspiracy, one that reached far beyond a corrupt county judge and his prison warden brother. Judge Richard Coleman sat in his home office, blinds drawn, security system armed. The past month had transformed him from respected jurist to public pariah, his name synonymous with corruption. Yet despite the public outrage, he remained confident in his ultimate protection. His phone rang, a secure line few knew existed. "Things are spiraling," Coleman said without preamble. "Jackson may be sidelined, but the evidence is still out there. Too many people talking." "Then give them someone else to talk about," replied the cultured voice on the other end. That was always the contingency plan. Sacrifice the appropriate pieces to protect the game. Coleman understood. After decades as a key player in the system, he was now expendable, useful only as a distraction from those higher up the chain. "I want guarantees. Full immunity, new identity, the offshore accounts unlocked. Prepare the documentation implicating Phillips, Hargrove, and your brother. Leave electronic trails to the state contractor's office and the governor's fundraising committee. Nothing reaching federal level, nothing about our special arrangement." Coleman began assembling evidence that would implicate his co-conspirators while protecting those truly in charge. Financial records showing kickbacks to his brother Samuel, emails between District Attorney Hargrove and police officials discussing evidence planting, communications with State Senator Phillips about judicial appointments tied to sentencing quotas. What Coleman didn't realize was that his secure line wasn't secure at all. Every conversation was being recorded by an unlikely alliance. Marcus Jackson, from his federal protection, working with James Watson, the former accountant still inside Blackwater, using skills and connections developed during Marcus's incarceration. The C. Evidence they gathered revealed a conspiracy far larger than anyone had imagined. Blackwater Penitentiary was just one facility in a nationwide network of private prisons systematically incarcerating young men of color for corporate profit. Similar operations existed in 12 states, each following the same playbook: corrupted judges, compromised police departments, and financial incentives flowing through shell companies. At the center was American Corrections Corporation, a private prison conglomerate with facilities in 28 states and political connections reaching the highest levels of government. Through campaign contributions, lobbying, and strategic placement of former executives in regulatory positions, the corporation had created a modern system of exploitation hidden behind tough-on-crime rhetoric. As Anthony and Marcus compiled their evidence, key witnesses began facing intensified pressure. Carol Martinez, the former clerk who had provided initial documentation, found her apartment broken into, her computer stolen. Andrea Wilson, the court reporter, received photographs of her children at school with implicit threats. Sophia Chen discovered surveillance devices in her hospital room during recovery. The most brazen move came when Cameron Torres, the journalist, whose reporting had broken the case open, was arrested on fabricated charges of evidence tampering. The message was clear: the system would protect itself by any means necessary. Anthony recognized the escalation for what it was: desperation. "They're showing their hand," he told Marcus during a secure meeting. "They wouldn't take these risks unless what we're uncovering threatens their entire operation." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Judge Coleman, realizing he was being set up as the fall guy, decided to save himself by revealing more than his handlers had authorized. Through his attorney, he offered a full confession in exchange for witness protection, including details about Operation Pipeline, the coordinated national program for targeting young men of color for incarceration. Coleman's confession implicated Governor Robert Mason, 3 state Supreme Court justices, and the CEO of American Corrections Corporation in a conspiracy spanning 15 years. He provided server addresses, account numbers, and meeting recordings that outlined the entire operation. Most shocking were the profit calculations, showing how each young black man imprisoned represented approximately $1.2 million in revenue over an average sentence. As Coleman finalized his plea agreement, Anthony faced intense pressure from Washington to limit the investigation's scope. Several senators demanded he focus solely on local corruption rather than expanding into politically sensitive areas. The White House counsel suggested the case could undermine public confidence in essential institutions if pursued too aggressively. The message was clear. There were boundaries Anthony was not to cross regardless of the evidence. Powerful interests expected containment, not comprehensive justice. They want us to accept Coleman and maybe his brother as sacrificial lambs. Anthony explained to his team, take the win, declare victory, and leave the system intact. Marcus, listening from his secure location, shook his head. After everything we've uncovered, after what happened to me and how many others, that's not justice, that's damage control. The dilemma crystallized Anthony's career-long conflict between working within the system and recognizing when that system itself was fundamentally corrupted. As Attorney General, he had unprecedented power to effect change, but that power depended on political support that was rapidly eroding. The decision point arrived when a special prosecutor was appointed to oversee the Coleman case, ostensibly to ensure impartiality, but actually to limit the investigation's scope. Harold Washington, a conservative former prosecutor with ties to the private prison industry, made clear in his first press conference that he would focus narrowly on Coleman's individual actions rather than unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. Anthony recognized the tactic immediately. By isolating Coleman's case from the broader system that enabled him, the special prosecutor would create the appearance of accountability while preserving the underlying corruption. Justice would be portrayed as a few bad apples rather than a poisoned orchard. The final warning came in the form of Coleman's death, found hanged in his home office the night before he was scheduled to sign his plea agreement. The death was immediately ruled a suicide, with a typed note expressing remorse for his actions. No autopsy was performed. No investigation into the security system's mysteriously disabled cameras was conducted. The message couldn't have been clearer. Anyone threatening the system would be eliminated, regardless of their former status or connections. Coleman, once a powerful figure in the conspiracy, had become a liability to be removed. Anthony immediately recognized the alleged suicide for what it was, a murder designed to silence Coleman before his formal testimony. The typed suicide note, the disabled security system, the rushed determination without autopsy, all pointed to a coordinated cover-up. They're burning their bridges, Anthony told his team during an emergency meeting in a secure location. Coleman knew too much, and they couldn't risk him talking, even with the limitations they were trying to place on his testimony. With Coleman dead, witnesses being threatened, and the special prosecutor narrowing the investigation, Anthony faced another critical decision point. His temporary removal from office had limited his official authority, but it had also freed him from certain institutional constraints. As a private citizen, he could take actions unavailable to the Attorney General. They've shown they'll kill to keep this quiet, Sophia warned. Everyone connected to this case is at risk now. The next blow came swiftly. Citing Anthony's inappropriate conduct and violation of recusal requirements, the president formally removed him from office. The accompanying statement praised his previous service, but emphasized the need for unquestioned ethical standards in the Justice Department. On the same day, the judge overseeing Marcus's case denied the motion to vacate his conviction despite overwhelming evidence of judicial misconduct in the original trial. The ruling cited procedural requirements and jurisdictional limitations rather than addressing the substance of the evidence. The message was unmistakable. The system was closing ranks, determined to protect itself regardless of the injustice. Anthony and Marcus, despite all they had uncovered, found themselves stripped of institutional power and official recourse. That evening, as father and son processed these developments in their secure location, Marcus voiced what both were thinking. They can take your title, Dad, but they can't take what we know, and they can't stop us from telling others. Anthony nodded slowly, his decision crystallizing. The system wants this contained, managed through official channels they control. So we go outside those channels. We bring everything into the light where they can't bury it. Over the next week, Anthony, Marcus, and their allies compiled everything. They had discovered financial records, wiretap recordings, witness statements, statistical analyses, and Coleman's partial confession before his death. They organized the evidence into comprehensive dossiers demonstrating not just individual corruption, but systematic exploitation of racial bias for profit. The witnesses who had been threatened now understood that official protection was unlikely. Several chose to go public with their knowledge, reasoning that visibility offered more safety than shadows. Andrea Wilson gave an exclusive interview about Coleman's courtroom practices. Carol Martinez detailed the financial connections between sentencing and prison profits. Most powerfully, Marcus himself recorded a detailed account of his experience, from wrongful conviction through the abuse at Blackwater to the discovery of the larger conspiracy. His testimony, combining personal trauma with documented evidence, provided a human face to the statistical patterns. As their preparation neared completion, Anthony received one final threat, a message containing current surveillance photos of his mother, Marcus's half-sister, and other family members, with the simple text, "Last warning, walk away." Anthony gathered his team one last time. "Tomorrow we release everything. I can't ask any of you to take this risk with us. Anyone who wants to step back now can do so with my complete understanding and gratitude for everything you've already done." No one left. The next morning, their evidence was simultaneously released through multiple channels: mainstream media outlets, independent journalists, legal advocacy organizations, congressional offices, state attorneys general, and international human rights groups. No single point of control could suppress all the information. Cameron Torres, released from jail after the fabricated charges collapsed, published a comprehensive exposé titled "American Gulag: How Racism Feeds the Prison." Profit Machine. The article detailed how young black men were systematically targeted, convicted on minimal evidence, and sentenced to maximum terms in private facilities that generated massive profits from their incarceration. The evidence implicated 4 governors, 12 judges, numerous prosecutors and police officials, and executives at American Corrections Corporation and its subsidiaries. The financial trail revealed campaign contributions, consulting contracts, offshore accounts, and real estate transactions, connecting public officials to private prison profits. Most damning were the corporation's internal documents showing how racial sentencing disparities were not just exploited but actively encouraged through lobbying, judicial selection, and prosecutor training. One executive memo explicitly noted that demographic targeting maximizes long-term revenue potential, corporate euphemism for the targeted incarceration of young black men. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted outside correctional facilities nationwide. Civil rights organizations filed class action lawsuits on behalf of thousands of potentially wrongfully convicted individuals. Congressional leaders from both parties called for emergency hearings. International human rights organizations issued statements condemning what they termed systematic racial imprisonment for profit. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Racism announced an investigation into what he called modern racial exploitation through mass incarceration. As public outrage mounted, previously reluctant officials found their political calculations shifting. State attorneys general, fearing association with the scandal, announced reviews of sentencing patterns in their jurisdictions. Federal judges, concerned about the judiciary's reputation, expedited reviews of cases connected to implicated judges. The special prosecutor, facing intense scrutiny over his connections to the private prison industry, recused himself from the investigation. His replacement, a respected former civil rights attorney, immediately expanded the scope to include the broader conspiracy Anthony had identified. For Anthony and Marcus, the public vindication came with personal costs. They remained under constant threat, requiring continuous security. Anthony's career in government was likely over, regardless of how the investigation concluded. Marcus still faced the trauma of his imprisonment and the challenge of rebuilding his interrupted life. Yet despite these costs, they had achieved what institutional channels had failed to deliver: a full accounting of the corruption that had stolen years from countless young men like Marcus, a system that had commodified racial bias for corporate profit. As investigations expanded across multiple jurisdictions, Anthony and Marcus watched from the sidelines, no longer directing the process, but satisfied that the truth they had fought for was finally receiving the attention it deserved. The system that had nearly destroyed them both was now being forced to confront its fundamental failures. 6 months after Anthony Jackson's dramatic removal from office, he sat in the back row of a federal courtroom, watching as his son Marcus stood before Judge Elaine Carver for a hearing that had seemed impossible a year earlier. The courtroom was packed with families of other young men sentenced by Coleman, journalists documenting the historic proceedings, and activists who had supported their cause. After reviewing the extensive evidence of judicial misconduct, prosecutorial malfeasance, and the systematic corruption that infected the original proceedings, this court has no choice but to vacate the conviction of Marcus Jackson, Judge Carver announced, her voice steady and deliberate. The prosecution has indicated they will not seek a new trial, given the tainted nature of the original evidence. Mr. Jackson, you are hereby released from all charges and restrictions. This court extends its deepest apologies for the miscarriage of justice you endured. As Marcus turned to embrace his father, the courtroom erupted in applause. After 18 months of wrongful imprisonment, physical abuse, and constant danger, Marcus was finally, officially free. The moment represented not just personal vindication, but the beginning of systemic change. In the months since Anthony and Marcus had released their evidence, the investigation had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. The Department of Justice had established a special task force to review all cases handled by corrupted judges. State bar associations had initiated disciplinary proceedings against prosecutors implicated in evidence tampering. Police departments faced consent decrees requiring complete overhauls of their practices. Most significantly, a federal judge had ordered a comprehensive review of all cases sentenced by Judge Coleman during his 20-year tenure. Over 300 convictions had already been vacated, with hundreds more under review. Each represented a life disrupted or destroyed by corruption. Each now offered at least the beginning of restoration. Anthony had declined reinstatement as Attorney General when the president, facing public pressure, had offered to correct the error of his removal. Instead, he and Marcus had established the Equal Justice Initiative, a foundation dedicated to identifying and challenging racially biased sentencing nationwide. The system tried to make us choose between personal justice for Marcus and structural justice for everyone affected, Anthony explained to a reporter after the hearing. We refused that choice. Real justice required both. The foundation quickly became the leading organization analyzing sentencing data for racial disparities, providing legal representation for potential wrongful convictions, and advocating for policy reforms to address structural bias in the criminal justice system. Marcus, now attending college while working with the foundation, brought crucial first-hand experience that shaped their approach. The relationship between father and son, severely damaged by years of absence and then tested by shared trauma, had gradually healed through their work together. Anthony had missed Marcus's childhood, but he was present now for his emergence as a powerful advocate for justice. Marcus had lost his youth to a corrupted system, but he had gained purpose in helping dismantle that system. Despite their successes, both knew the fight was far from over. American Corrections Corporation had rebranded and restructured, its executives claiming ignorance of rogue operations. Several high-level political figures implicated in the scandal had evaded significant consequences through their connections. The system, though wounded, was adapting to preserve its essential functions. Most concerning was the evidence Anthony had uncovered, suggesting the corruption reached even higher than they had initially believed. Financial records indicated connections between American Corrections Corporation and several Supreme Court justices who had consistently ruled in favor of restricting prisoners' rights and limiting appeals. These connections proved challenging to address through conventional channels. When Anthony presented the evidence to congressional oversight committees, he faced resistance from members of both parties who received campaign contributions from the same sources. Media outlets owned by conglomerates with financial ties to the prison industry gave minimal coverage to these higher-level allegations. They're willing to sacrifice the local judges and wardens, Anthony told Marcus after another frustrating congressional hearing, but they're protecting the structural corruption that makes the whole system profitable. This realization led to their most audacious strategy yet, using the Foundation's resources to identify and support reform candidates for judgeships, prosecutor positions, and legislative seats. By changing who held power within the system, they aimed to change how that power was exercised. The strategy faced intense opposition. Foundation staff received threats. Potential candidates faced unprecedented negative campaigns. Corporate funding flowed to opponents of reform. Yet gradually, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, the landscape began to shift as more officials committed to addressing systemic bias gained positions of influence. For Marcus, the most meaningful victory came when he received his college acceptance letter, fulfilling the dream that had been interrupted by his wrongful conviction. Though he had lost nearly 2 years of his life, he had gained perspective and purpose that shaped his decision to pursue a law degree focused on civil rights. "What happened to me wasn't an accident or an exception," Marcus explained during a campus speech that went viral. "It was the system functioning as designed, converting young black bodies into corporate profit through the machinery of biased justice. My case got attention because my father had power, but thousands more remain trapped in that system. Their freedom is connected to all of our freedom." The Foundation's work soon expanded to include educational initiatives about systemic racism, in criminal justice, training programs for defense attorneys challenging biased prosecutions, and community organizing to increase civic participation in judicial elections typically decided by small percentages of eligible voters. Throughout this work, Anthony and Marcus maintained security precautions, aware that powerful interests remained threatened by their activities. Each victory in court or at the ballot box represented a financial loss for those who had profited from mass incarceration, creating enemies with resources and influence. A year after Marcus's release, their concerns were validated when evidence revealed Supreme Court Justice William Phillips had secretly orchestrated much of the resistance to their investigation. Phillips, who had received over $2 million in speaking fees from groups connected to American Corrections Corporation, had used his influence to pressure officials at multiple levels of government. The revelation came through an unlikely source, Justice Phillips' former clerk, who provided documentation of the justice's communications with corporate executives about strategically limiting prisoner rights through carefully selected cases. The evidence suggested Phillips had helped design the legal framework that facilitated the profit-driven incarceration system. Anthony and Marcus debated how to proceed with this explosive information. Attempting to impeach a Supreme Court justice would trigger unprecedented resistance, yet allowing such corruption at the highest level of the judiciary to continue unchallenged would undermine everything they had fought for. "This is bigger than us now," Marcus told his father as they reviewed the evidence. "It's about whether we truly have equal justice under law or just the illusion of it." Their decision to publish the evidence through multiple international outlets simultaneously prevented any single entity from suppressing the information. The resulting scandal triggered congressional hearings, judicial ethics investigations, and renewed public demand for accountability at all levels. Justice Phillips initially denied the allegations, but eventually resigned when additional documents emerged, confirming his coordination with prison industry executives. His departure created an opening on the Supreme Court that the president, mindful of public sentiment, filled with a former public defender with a strong record on civil rights. For Anthony and Marcus, Phillips's downfall represented the culmination of their battle against corruption. From a county judge's prejudiced ruling in a small courtroom to the highest court in the land, they had exposed how racism and profit had distorted the machinery of justice. As Marcus walked across the stage to receive his undergraduate degree, Anthony watched with pride from the audience. Their journey from estrangement to partnership had transformed not just their relationship, but the system that had nearly destroyed them both. "The work continues," Marcus told reporters who asked about their next steps. "Because justice isn't something you achieve once and then move on. It's something you have to fight for every day in every courtroom, for every person facing a system that wasn't designed to see their humanity." 3 days later, Justice Phillips was found dead in his home. an apparent suicide before his scheduled testimony before a grand jury. The circumstances mirrored Judge Coleman's death: a typed note, disabled security system, and rushed conclusion without thorough investigation. As Anthony and Marcus received the news, they exchanged knowing glances. The pattern was familiar. Those who threatened to expose the full extent of corruption didn't live to testify. Phillips's death would be portrayed as an admission of guilt rather than the silencing it likely represented. "This isn't over, is it?" Marcus asked quietly. "No," Anthony replied, "but this time we're not fighting alone." As Marcus stepped into the sunlight as a free man, he knew this wasn't the end of their battle against injustice, but merely the beginning of a new chapter where this time they would fight together. This powerful narrative serves as a stark reminder that systemic racism continues to corrupt our justice system, turning young black lives into commodities for profit. Marcus and Anthony's journey shows us that true justice requires both personal courage and systemic change. When institutions designed to protect citizens instead exploit them, reform cannot come solely from within. It demands voices willing to speak truth to power, regardless of personal cost. The story highlights how corruption flourishes in shadows and withers under scrutiny. By bringing evidence into the light, father and son achieved what seemed impossible, exposing a network that extended from local courtrooms to the highest levels of government. Their transformation from estranged family members to powerful allies demonstrates that reconciliation and justice can emerge even from devastating circumstances. Perhaps most importantly, the narrative reminds us that justice is not a destination, but a continuous journey. Each victory reveals new challenges. Each exposed corruption unveils deeper networks of power. True change requires vigilance, perseverance, and the understanding that freedom for any of us depends on freedom for all of us. Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice that made you feel powerless? Comment below with a time when you stood up against unfairness, no matter how small the victory. If you believe our justice system needs greater accountability and transparency, hit that like button to show your support. Our fight against systemic racism and corruption continues every day. Subscribe to join this community of justice warriors making a difference. Share this story with someone who needs to understand how racial bias infiltrates our institutions. Thank you for bearing witness to Marcus and Anthony's journey. Together we can build a more just world where people are valued above profits.